the weather while we're waiting.
All right.
So what does your yard look like?
It's pretty swamped. I made the mistake of walking out this morning in my tennis shoes, and my socks were soaked by the time I came back in. I go out and I update my sign every morning with my joke on it.
Yeah.
So it requires that I have to walk through quite a bit of ivy that's growing around the tree, and it was quite swampy this morning.
Yeah. We have quite a bit of water on the back quarter of the lawn. The fire pit is under at least 6 inches of water. I had ducks swimming over one of my vegetable gardens. And then the one I just put in, it was underwater for a while yesterday. It's not underwater now, but what a mess. I just can't wait for the mosquitoes.
They're going to be so bad.
I know.
We just talked about needing a lot of bug spray and planting some citronella around our patio, hoping that we could stave some of them off. But they love me. I end up chewed alive. So just preparing myself.
Okay. Well, it looks like we have some people coming in now, trickling in. Welcome, everybody, to virtually being in Burley Corners in Penfield Township. This is Michael McCullough of Willard Library for another installment of Stories at Sundown. Unfortunately, not outside, not next to the fire. There's just too much water and too much threat of more water. But we're evolving. We're evolving Stories at Sundown. We're opening up to the community. And my first guest from the community is Kathy Szenda Wilson, an old friend, an associate, and co-conspirator. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you, Mac.
Glad to have you.
Happy to be here.
Well, good. Yeah.
And I love the sound of the frog. It's the perfect ambiance for us. If we can't be outside, at least we can hear it.
Yeah. It'll probably disrupt the audio a little bit, but hey, so do the motorcycles, and so do the birds and the ducks and everything else. And there we have someone saying hello. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Claire.
So before we start, why don't you tell folks, although I think everybody knows Kathy Wilson, but tell folks what you do.
All right. So I like to introduce myself as a recovering funder. I spent 17 years of my career between the Kellogg Foundation and the Community Foundation, really in a position of trying to help make sure that the resources were available for community change to happen and for people to have the things they needed. But I realized at some point that I really kind of wanted to get on the other side of the equation and be a little closer to the work and help organizations work better together. So I launched BC Pulse in 2012 with that ambition of trying to make things work a little bit better from an efficiency and quality standpoint, and working specifically in early childhood. I did a lot of work with you on the Monday morning group, where we discovered this work around trauma and understanding the adverse childhood experiences study. And that has become a big part of my work as well. So understanding the neurosciences, so neurobiology and the epigenetics, the ACE study, as well as resilience. There are themes with the conversations that you and I have continually about what makes folks successful and healthy despite things that might happen to them that are to the contrary, and really kind of digging into what those are. So I'm looking forward to our theme this evening.
Yeah, our theme is resilience, which is what we talk about often, about how people come through hardship and why some people come through it more or less intact, and why others struggle more, and what resilience is. And I think, as the guest, I get to defer to you to tell us what we read. Before we do that, though, I just want to share that as we're researching, and Kathy and I have done a lot of workshops around this issue, and I'm the one that's always sending out literary references from books that I'm reading, where characters that you really love, that you really follow, or poems, their voice, it really speaks to the resilience in the human soul, and that is often what drives great literature, great work. But tell folks what resilience is, and I'll correct you when you make a mistake, okay?
So from a scientific standpoint, resilience is really just the ability to buffer the things that happen that could have negative consequence, right? So resilience can be the positive relationships you have with people in your life. It can be mindfulness practices. So when you have toxic stress that's present in your life, your ability to actually mitigate that is what resilience looks like. And it's also the ability to bounce back, right? So if you think about things being resilient, it's if things go bad, do I go down a rabbit hole, or am I able to actually function?
Yeah, I think you did a great job.
Thanks.
So as the guest, I'm going to throw the ball over to you first to share a little bit about what you're reading and tell us about it.
So I discovered Glennon Doyle, actually, I believe through Brene Brown, who interviewed her for one of her podcasts. And actually, it may have even been Oprah, but I just know that I was taken by her story. And I thought, this is really fascinating, just her journey, how she had depicted it from being a woman who was married to a man with 3 children and discovering the person and the soul that she actually loved was Abby Wambach, the Olympic soccer player, and the two of them finding themselves in such an unbelievable way. And from there, creating Together Rising, which has, as a philanthropist, has just been an unbelievable democratization of philanthropy. So she has said, if you can give $20, you can be a part of this. And I was really intrigued by the new book that came out, and read it as soon as it came out, thanks to my friend Kathy Grosso, who dropped a copy off on my doorstep because I couldn't get a copy online mailed to me before the end of May.
Ooh, she could be a good guest here.
You'd be an awesome guest.
Nope.
And so I drank it up, like I couldn't put it down. And it's a great book because it's not terribly linear. So it's really helpful for if you have a kind of a chaotic life and you're all over the place, you could read the last chapter and then go back and read the 3rd chapter and you're okay. It's not a linear story. It's really just almost a brain dump of hers, and each chapter has its own theme. And so the chapter that I chose is one she calls Boulders. And as you suggested to me this theme, I started thinking about all the things I've been reading, and there's a lot of stuff that is intentionally about resilience, but this one really spoke to me because of the experiences I've had in my own life with people who've had addictions, with people who have struggled to show what love looks like. And so I'm going to read this chapter for you, and then we'll go from there. So, dear Glennon, I just brought my baby girl home from the hospital. When I put her down on the floor in her carrier, I forgot how to breathe. I don't know how to do this. I'm so afraid. My mother didn't love me well. At least once a day, I think, why couldn't she love me? Was there something wrong with her or me? What if it was me? How will I ever know how to mother my daughter if I've never known mothering love? This was a letter Glennon received from someone named H. Dear H, this is what I know. Parents love their children. I've met no exceptions. Love is a river, and there are times when impediments stop the flow of love. Mental illness, addiction, shame, narcissism, fear, passed down by religious and cultural institutions, these are boulders that interrupt love's flow. Sometimes there's a miracle and the boulder's removed. Some families get to experience this removal miracle. Many don't. There's no rhyme or reason. No family earns it. Healing is not the reward for those who love the most or who love the best. When a parent becomes healthy again, her child begins to feel her love. When the boulder is removed, the water flows again. It's the way of the river, the way of a parent's love. Your parent, your sister, your friend, the one who couldn't love you, her love was impeded. That love was there, swirling, festering, vicious in its desperation for release. It was there, it is there, all for you. That love exists. It just couldn't get past the boulder. You could trust me about this because I have been the impeded river. The boulder of addiction blocked my love, and all my family felt for me was pain and absence. My dad used to ask, why, Glennon? Why do you lie to my face and treat us so terribly? Do you even love us? I did. I felt all the love swirling and festering, and the pressure of it all felt like it would kill me, but they couldn't feel any of it. To them, it didn't exist. When I got my removal, my sobriety, which was both a spontaneous miracle and excruciatingly difficult work, eventually my love was able to flow to my people again because I was always the river, not the boulder. Desperate people often ask me, how did you get sober? What did your family do? They tried everything and none of it had anything to do with my recovery. All the love in the world cannot remove a boulder because the removal is not between the impeded and the ones who love her. The removal is strictly between the impeded one and her God. I am so sorry, H. You deserve to have the love of your mother delivered to you. You deserve to be soaked through to the bone with her love every day and every night. But now I need you to listen to me. The miracle of grace is that you can give what you have never gotten. You do not get your capacity for love from your parents. They're not your source. Your source is God. You are your own source. Your river is strong. Soak that baby girl of yours to the bone day and night. Flow unimpeded.
Wow. That's beautiful. I can understand why you drank it up. I often get choked up when I read on this, so it's okay.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about how that speaks to you of resilience.
You know, I appreciate metaphors so much when it comes to things that I struggle to put words to, right? And then when somebody finds the right metaphor for me, all I can think about when I read this, and each time I read it, is my sister who's been addicted her whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And that the number of people who feel like she's incapable of love, when it's there, it just can't get through, right? So it really helps me. In the work that you and I do, Mac, we talk a lot about it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. And that grace is so easy to give to people theoretically. It's so hard to do in real life. And so it's been a real test for me to just be thinking about the people that I love that I think have had some boulders and still have boulders.
Yeah. We all have boulders to some degree, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about a lot of things that I wanted to read, and we're only 12 minutes into it, and so I've read this Where the Crawdads Sing. I read the book probably twice.
It's a good one. I like that one a lot.
Delia Owens. And I don't think that it gets the literary respect that it deserves. It was her first work of fiction. She is a technical writer, a scientist. But the story, for those who haven't read it, and it's still a pretty popular book, so it's still circulating quite a bit. It's about this girl who was abandoned by her entire family one at a time. First her mother walks off, and that's how the book ends or begins. And her siblings all leave, and leaves her with her alcoholic father, who eventually leaves himself. And she's left to fend for herself in the swamps of near the shore in North Carolina. And her story of survival is just
amazing.
It's amazing, and it's heartbreaking, and it's beautiful. And her relationship with the land is incredible. But I think one of the things that always stuck with me when we talk about resilience and when we talk about how you build it, and that's the thing, is resilience isn't something you're necessarily born with. You build that through the relationships that you have. And ideally, it's an entire family that surrounds you with love. But sometimes it's those chance encounters with individuals. So the teacher who lets you bend their ear after school and became a habit, or the school bus driver, or the neighbor. There's always all these chances to help somebody find their way to strength and survival. And so I just love the book, and I talk about it a lot. The little section that I want to read here is where she is meeting the brother who's closest to her for the first time since he has left, since he had left as a child. And again, she was totally abandoned. Nobody reached out and nobody looked her up. She was totally alone. She ended up never going to school, but she was taught to read by a neighbor boy. And I'm not going to give too much of the story away, because it's a hell of an ending, but it's the kind of thing you want to discover yourself. But in this scene, he has driven up in his pickup truck. I think he's still in his Army uniform, if I remember correctly. He had been in the Army, served in Vietnam, and they meet, and he is showing her paintings. Her mother was an artist who painted these beautiful paintings, even in the depths of her pain. and continued to paint throughout her life until she passed away. So he gave her time, then said, "Look at this one." Before him was an astonishingly colorful oil of two children squatting in swirls of green grass and wildflowers. The girl was only a toddler, perhaps 3 years old, her straight black hair falling over her shoulders. The boy, a bit older, with golden curls, pointed to a monarch butterfly, its black and yellow wings spread across a daisy. His hand was on the girl's arm. "I think that's Tate Walker," Jody said. "And you?" "I think you're right. It looks like him. Why would Ma paint Tate?" "He used to come around quite a bit, fish with me. He was always showing you insects and stuff." "Why don't I remember that?" "You were very young. One afternoon, Tate boated into our lagoon where Pa was pulling on his poke, really drunk. You were waiting and Pa was supposed to be watching you. Suddenly, for no reason at all, Pa grabbed you by your arms and shook you so hard your head was thrown back. Then he dropped you in the mud and started laughing. Tate jumped out of the boat and ran up to you. He was only 7 or 8 years old, but he shouted at Pa. Of course, Pa smacked him and screamed at him to get off his land, never come back or he'd shoot him. By this time, we'd all run down to see what was happening. Even with Pa ranting and raving, Tate picked you up and handed you to Ma. He made sure you were all right before he left. He still went fishing some after that, but he never came back to our place again. Not until he led me home that first time I took the boat into the marsh, Kaya thought. She looked at the painting, so pastel, so peaceful. Somehow Ma's mind had pulled beauty from lunacy. Anyone looking at these portraits would think they portrayed the happiest of families, living on a seashore, playing in the sunshine. Jody and Kaya sat on the rim of the truck bed, still looking quietly at the paintings. He continued, Ma was isolated and alone. Under those circumstances, people behaved differently. Kaya made a soft groan. Please don't talk to me about isolation. No one has to tell me how it changes a person. I have lived it. I am isolation, Kaya whispered with a slight edge. I forgive Ma for leaving, but I don't understand why she didn't come back, why she abandoned me. You probably don't remember. After she walked away, you told me that a she-fox will sometimes leave her kits if she's starving or some other extreme stress. The kits die, as they probably would have anyway, but the vixen lives to breed again when conditions are better, when she can raise a new litter to maturity. I've read a lot about this since, in nature, out yonder where the crawdads sing. These ruthless seeming behaviors actually increase the mother's number of young over her lifetime, and thus her genes for abandoning offspring in times of stress are passed on to the next generation, and so on. It happens in humans too. Some behaviors that seem harsh to us now ensured the survival of early man in whatever swamp he was at that time. Without them, we wouldn't be here. We still store those instincts in our genes, and they express themselves when certain circumstances prevail. Some parts of us will always be what we were, what we had to be to survive, way back yonder. And when I've read this section, I've read a lot more of it to small groups because it's so touching the way that they revisit their pain and yet find themselves in that scene. But one of the things that just resonated with me and why I shared it with you, because I think we were preparing to do a workshop around this, was how behavior that seems aberrant or seems unnecessarily cruel often is symptomatic of what people had to do to survive in the first place, right?
Yeah. Those are adaptations, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It amazes me how the human spirit will fight to stay alive no matter what it takes, right? I mean, that book, when you got to know the mother's story more, Kaya's mother, Jody's mother, was just heart-wrenching, right? Yeah. Like to make that kind of decision reminds me of a Nayyirah Waheed poem. Can I read this if you
please,
with permission? This one is called Before.
Please, repeat the name for those who haven't heard of it.
Yeah, Nayyirah Waheed. And we'll make sure that, I think it's in your description of tonight's thing.
Yeah.
This one is called Before You Get That Key Made. It was when you allow that man to walk through your children, plant his feet into veins, hold their voices, necks, bodies, inside his violence. You are no longer a mother. When you give him the key to that door, because you need to be loved by someone, you season them for the wolf, burn their childhood into fantasy. It's going to take a third of their lives, all their courage, from their cells to their hair, to learn the alchemic formula that turns that kind of betrayal. A demothering, soft, livable. It's so easy to blame mothers who walk away, right? Like to say, and this is the theme, right? Like even in the Glennon Doyle piece, the mother was absent even if she was physically there. When I think about my sister, she's mothered 5 children there's this poem, there's Kaya and Jody's mother. Like women have found themselves in these spaces that feel like the only option they have is to escape if they want to survive. And often they leave in their wake children that are meant to build resilience on their own if they can, right?
Yeah.
But their own stories are pretty deep and probably as equally troubling as the ones they're creating. So it's very complicated. And blame and shame just don't have any place in there. It doesn't help.
No,
right?
You're right. No, I think just one of the things that it teaches me is this idea of recognizing the strength that somebody needed just to persevere, just to survive, And so, kids who act up in school, what are they acting out of? What are they doing? They're adapting to what they need to do to survive so often. I'm really drawn to a selection that I know we have time for one more, and so I get to choose. No, but I think we both chose this. Audre Lorde, the feminist, Black lesbian, warrior, poet, author, who passed away. I want to say 91, maybe 81. But this poem, I've read it several times since discovering A Litany for Survival, and we do have a couple of her volumes of collected poems at Willard Library, and you can find them on Hoopla, and you can find all this stuff on Hoopla or Libby. This often what comes out of recognizing your value is strength, and as she described herself, a warrior. And the strength of this poem is really inspiring to me. And it's called A Litany for Survival, and it's in her volume, Collected Poems. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone, for those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going, in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward, at once before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures, like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the deaths of ours. For those of us who are imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hope to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we are never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. Ooh. Audre Lorde. So.
And how relevant that is given this collective trauma we're all experiencing right now.
Absolutely.
Right? These feelings of isolation, sense of fear, anxiety, just lack of knowing where we're going. It's a scary time, right? So what's going to come out of it, what's going to be birthed out of this collective experience, I think we don't know yet. But I do know, based even on the pieces that we've shared here, that usually it's something beautiful for those who survive, right? And that gives me hope.
Sure. When we draw a lot of parallels, although this is not the Great Depression and we're not in a world war, but we draw a lot of parallels to those right now, to those times in our history where want was so great. And I think there's a lot of fear about how much want there will be in the months and maybe years ahead because of all this. But look at how much good did emerge from that collective understanding of how we need each other, right? Yeah. And, again and again, when I read good work, that's always the thing that for me floats it to the top of my list and why it's worth sharing.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing with us this evening. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was fun. And any of you out there that think you'd like to join us some evening, we'd be happy to have you. Next week, I believe, although things can change, our schedules are always so crazy. And this gentleman, as director of the Share Center, has quite a job on his hands. But Robert Elkert has agreed to join me next week. And first thing that came to his mind was Love Supreme by John Coltrane. So I don't know how we read from
oh, you can make it happen.
But we'll figure something out, and it'll be good. If you haven't met Robert, he is quite a man, and he's doing a great job in this crisis. So
an unbelievable job.
Yeah. All right.
Well, next Tuesday is my birthday, Max, so you guys can play a birthday song for me through John Coltrane.
Yeah, that'll be great. All right. Well, happy birthday early.
Thank you.
Thank you again, and thank you all for coming, and I will see you next week, I hope. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.